Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Footprints of the Creator. Your host this evening is myself, Yusuf, and Abdul Kader.
Assalamu alaikum. This evening we're going to start a new topic. We're going to start off with the environment of the earth and with specific reference to the various cycles that are found in this earth which help in maintaining and preserving life and balance that we are so dependent upon. And we will also proceed further on to touching on to the plant kingdom. Now if you look at the earth, one thing strikes us, and that is it is never stable and static. There is continuous change going on at every level, because this world that we're living in is changing either at the microscopic level or even at the cosmic level, whether right down the tiny ant that we know or even the huge galaxies. There is constant motion and constant change. This happens because there are many physical and chemical forces which come either from outer space or even from within the earth, which acts on the earth's substance, and it acts on all living and non-living matter. Hence, there is a state of dynamism and change. There is tremendous amounts of energy which enters the earth, and tremendous amounts of energy that leaves the earth. This energy, most of which comes from the sun, passes through the atmospheric filter, and it reaches the earth in the form of ultraviolet and visible light. This heat and the energy that radiates out from the earth is mainly in the form of heat. This energy flux constantly keeps the earth's matter in a state of continuous change, and it is never in equilibrium. This phenomena of constant change, of constant energy coming in to the earth and leaving the earth, is something which was alluded to in the Quran 1400 years ago in Surah 57 verse 4, where we are told, "It is He who created the heavens and the earth in 6 periods and is firmly established on the throne of authority. He knows what enters the earth and what comes out of it, what comes down from the heaven and what mounts up to it." Now these environmental changes which occur have a specific rhythmic pattern which occurs continuously. These pattern cycles are produced mainly by the heat of the sun and the rotation of the earth. For example, the seasonal climatic changes which occur, all these follow cycles. But there are also many other environmental cycles which occur. It may not be possible for us to observe these cycles because they are either observing at a very, very tiny level, or either they are occurring at a very large level, that is at the macroscopic level, or they may be too slow for us to perceive, or they are occurring far too rapidly for us to observe. But nonetheless, there are cycles operating on this earth which are essential and vital for life to occur. Now if you look at all living matter, basically it can be incorporated into these cycles. If we divide the environment, it can take 3 aspects. The first aspect of the earth's environment can be called what we call the hydrosphere. This deals with waters, that is in the ocean and in the lands, a topic which we have discussed with already. The second aspect is called the lithosphere, which is the solid parts of the earth. And the third division of the earth and its environment is called the atmosphere, which is self-explanatory. Now as I've mentioned, we've already discussed the aspects of the hydrosphere with regard to the water cycle in quite detail in previous programs. And the cycle on the solid parts of the earth was also covered when we discussed the earth's structure. We explained also how the continuous changes occur with erosion of soil in oceans and the readjustments that take place all the time. We'll now look at some of the cycles which occur, which maintain the balance on earth.
Right. Let us first look at the cycle of life as we know it. Now, all living organisms are interdependent on each other and on the environment in which they live. That is, on living and non-living things in the environment. Just to give us some perspective, let's refer to the Quran. In Surah 16 verses 10 to 11 we are told, "It is He who sends down rain from the sky, from it you drink, and out of it grows a vegetation on which you feed your cattle. With it He produces for you corn, olives, date palms, grapes, and every kind of fruit. Verily, in this is a sign for for those who give thought. Surah 50, verse 9 and 11. And we send down from the sky rain charged with blessing, and we produce therewith gardens and grain for harvest, and tall and stately palm trees with shoots of fruit stalks pile one over another as sustenance for Allah's servants. And we give new life to a land that is dead. Thus will be the resurrection. And also in Surah 16 verse 5, and cattle He has created for you men. From them you derive warmth and numerous benefits, and of their meat you eat. Jesus' illustration from this Quranic ayah, we are given a very beautiful description of the dependence and interdependence of the various factors which are involved in environment. We are told of how the dead earth, the inorganic earth, from it springs life and we get the vegetation growing. We show how the vegetation depends on these inorganic nutrients such as the soil, such as water, and how the vegetation grows, and then how this vegetation is a source of food for animals as well as human beings. And this is very beautifully illustrates how this works. Let us now analyze the energy cycle and see how this process takes place. Now, all living organisms, with the exception of a very few bacteria, are dependent on energy of the sun as a source of energy, whether it is directly or indirectly. They need energy from the sun. Now, plants are the only living beings that can directly use the energy of the sun. Now, they have a very specialized pigment which is called chlorophyll. Now, this is present in leaves and stems of plants, and it is what gives the green color to the leaves. Now, these are regarded as the powerhouses of the plant, and the leaf is commonly known as the food factory of the plant. In fact, it is a food factory of all organisms, as we shall see. Now, this chlorophyll that is found in these green plants has a unique property of absorbing the energy of the sun. Now, this energy is trapped as chemical energy by a process called photosynthesis. Now, that sounds like a very big term, but what actually happens is a plant, what it does is it absorbs water and other nutrients, whatever it needs from the soil, whether it's the various elements and the various minerals and so on, it absorbs it via its roots. Now, when light shines on the leaf of a plant, it passes right through the outer layer. Now, the outer layer is transparent like a glass, and the chlorophyll, which is present just below that, absorbs this light or this energy. Now, this energy is trapped in this process, which results in the formation of simple sugar compounds like glucose. That is, the plant uses carbon dioxide from the air, it uses water, and using the various nutrients, traps this energy to form basic foods like glucose. And these foods are stored in the plant as starch, as cellulose, as various other carbohydrates, as fats and other proteins. Now, this food of the plant serves as the main source of food for all animals. In fact, we know the plant-eating animals, which are called herbivores, the plant-eating animals feed on the animals and eat the plants. And in this way, they obtain the energy that is stored in the foods of the plant. Now, when light shines on the plants, they only use 0.1 to 1% of the total solar energy that is falling on them. So it's a very small percentage of this light that falls on the plant that is actually absorbed. And yet this is the basis of all food for all living creatures. It's absolutely amazing. Now, apart from the energy that is trapped into these foods, most of it is utilized by the plant itself. The plant uses it for its own living, and only a small percent of it remains, which is stored as the foods like starch and the carbohydrates and so on in the plant. Now, when the plant-eating animals eat the plants, this is their source of energy. Now, this energy is obtained from these foods, which is broken down, and of this energy, the animal uses most of this energy for its function, and only 10% or maximum 20% of this energy actually remains in the animal itself and is stored in the animal's muscle and in the animal's tissue. Now, when this plant-eating animal is eaten by animals which eat meat, the meat-eating animals, which are called carnivores, and also eaten by man, then man takes, and these animals get the energy from the meat. And we know that the energy is stored in the food, which is stored in the meat. And so when they eat the meat and break down this is the source of energy for all the carnivores as well as man. And what they do is they break down this energy, and they use most of the energy, of course, for their own use. And 10 to 20% of the remaining energy is stored in those animals, which is the carnivores, and in man himself. So you can see by that time there's very little energy that's actually stored. Now, when man dies, or when a plant dies, or when animal dies, or when there's waste products excreted into the environment, what happens now is that these are acted upon by the decomposers. Now, the decomposers are various fungi and bacteria which cause the breakdown of this dead tissue. And when they break down this tissue by decomposition and by rotting as we know it, then they cause the release of this energy. And this energy is released mainly as heat. So what we find is ultimately all the energy that has been passed from the plant to the animals and so on, it undergoes various changes. That is, from light energy from the sun, it is converted to chemical energy in the chemical compounds or the food of the plant itself. And then when it is used by the plant or eaten by the humans or eaten by animals, this energy is converted to what they call kinetic energy, or energy of motion, which is responsible for movement, and is converted to heat and so on, and various transformations of energy. But ultimately it comes back to the environment as heat. So we see that the cycle of energy that goes continuously round and round and maintains efficiency as well. So this very briefly is the cycle of life.
I think it puts a little different perspective on the little leaf and plants which we so needlessly destroy. I think we should treat the little leaf with a little more respect, because if, as you've explained, from that humble leaf we actually owe our energy and our existence because
Absolutely.
of the various processes in which actually it goes through.
It's a food factory.
It's a food factory for
without
all.
it, there's no food.
That's true. And as we've mentioned, there's a very delicate and fine balance that is maintained in our environment, and this is essential for us and for life to continue existing. We realize that we are actually totally dependent on other living creatures for our existence. There is this mutual dependence of one species on another. If we have to adapt or change any one part of the environment, we either increase or decrease any of the components or any of the species that are present, it immediately causes a chain reaction with regard to another aspect of the environment. And this ultimately works so as to restore the balance. If we try and adjust one aspect, automatically things have been so programmed that a balance is maintained by the other aspects reacting. I'll give you an example how this occurs. But firstly, let's look at what the Quran says in Surah 15 verse 19. We are told, "The earth we provide all kinds of things in due balance." Again, in Surah 5 verse 49 we are told, "Verily all things have we created in proportion and due measure." Now these two verses, if they sound familiar, it's because they are. We have discussed them previously. These were discussed in previous programs where we at length showed how the delicate order, balance and proportion is maintained with regard to the celestial bodies, that Allah has created everything in proportion, and we've showed the laws, the immutable laws that are present which maintain this balance in with regard to the celestial bodies. Let us look at now the application of this verse with regard to the balance, more so with the earth and its environment. Let's take an example so that we can see how this balance is maintained. Suppose we take a community of plants, rabbits and foxes. This community made up of this food web, this chain made up of three species: the plants, the rabbits and foxes. Now we know the plants are a source of food for the rabbits, and the rabbits are a source of food for the foxes. Now when we get a good rainfall, good rain, water is essential for plants to survive. So with the abundance of rain, the dry earth turns green, we get lush vegetation forming, and plants start to flourish because they need rain to grow. So we have now, with the falling of good rains, abundance of plants, and thus the plant population increases. So with an increase in the plant population, we find that there is now more food for rabbits, because rabbits are dependent on the plants for food. So whenever you get an abundance of supply of food, this automatically will bring about an increase in the population of the rabbits. So this population increases. So now we've got an excess of plants. This triggers a reaction. More rabbits feed on the plants. As a result, the rabbits are now well fed and their population start to increase as well. Now with the increase in the rabbit population, what happens? We get more food for the foxes. So the foxes now have more food. So more foxes start to proliferate and we get more foxes. The population of the fox starts increasing. So we can see with the good rains, it has slightly upset the initial balance by causing a flourishing in plants. But this triggered off a chain reaction. With the plant kingdom flourishing, the rabbits started to flourish because there are more rabbits to eat up the plants. And this caused an increase in the foxes. Now when the population of the foxes increased, this implies there are more rabbits that they could hunt, and therefore this brought about a check in the rabbit population. So the increase in the foxes causes a decrease in the population of the rabbits. An increase in plants causes increase in rabbits, and with the increase in the rabbits, you get less of the food because now there are more rabbits to feed. So what this chain reaction basically shows, that there is a balance that is maintained. If you anywhere in that food chain, if you interfere with, automatically we get adjustments occurring, and this serves to maintain the balance. Everything is dependent mutually on another. Nothing can occur erratically and haphazardly. So this is one very basic example as to how things are maintained in their correct proportion. There can never be an excess of rabbits, because automatically you will get more foxes and that will curb the population, and it occurs in the form of a chain reaction. This is just one natural aspect that maintains a balance, because everything is dependent on another for its survival. And with the flourishing of one thing, we get another flourishing, and that itself brings about a check on the other. There are other factors as well which maintain a balance in nature. We know various animals, even the plants, compete for nutrients. If we've got a collection of plants in a limited space, what happens is that there is a limited amount of nutrients both in the soil and even in the form of water that is available. So this in itself, so the stronger plants will compete for the minimal nutrients that are available, and this will kill off weaker plants. So this form of competition serves to eliminate wanton flourishing and excess in any population. This is the process of competition. Even in the animal kingdom, if there is limited food, the stronger will survive and they will kill off the weaker. So this form of competition occurs whereby animals and plants compete for limited resources. This prevents an abundance of any specific population. Another natural factor which occurs, which helps to curb and check and maintain these balances in nature, is diseases which afflict plants and animals. We get many natural diseases which occur. These are not necessarily an evil, because they are needed and necessary to maintain and check and provide this balance. Sometimes man intervenes when there is an excessive in population and we get culling and we're getting them having to put down species of animals. This happens when there is a bit of an imbalance, but the balance has got to be maintained. And lastly, we get the concept of the survival of the fittest, whereby the weak is destroyed and the strongest survive. So we can see that everything in nature is balanced. Nothing is haphazard, and there are various species which are in existence, which maintain these checks and balances.
In fact, we find that how beautifully Allah provides various checks and balances in nature to ensure this balance and harmonious between all living and non-living organisms. To give you one example, if you take one pair of flies, and if all their offspring were to survive, and if these offspring had other offspring, and if all their offspring had to survive, and so it goes on and so on, they say in 1 year, you'll have a mass of flies, if you put them together, which will make a sphere of 96 million miles,
Sure.
which is greater than the distance between the earth and sun. Now this shows how the tremendous numbers of flies that could result had there not been any checks and balances. And this goes to emphasize how beautifully Allah has made various checks and balances. There are certain animals, others prey on them, and they fight amongst each other for competition for food, etc. And all these various factors beautifully cause a check in this population and maintain them at a perfect balance.
It's absolutely amazing that we don't really pick up these subtle forces that are at play in our earth and which are necessary for there to be the normal continuation of life. But it is absolutely amazing, these various factors which are responsible for maintaining these checks and balances.
Right. Let us go on now to look at the life and death cycle. Now in numerous verses of the Quran, for example in Surah 23 verse 80, Allah tells us, "It is He, that is Allah, who gives life and death." So we see from this Quranic ayah that life and death are an essential part of Allah's creation, and that we find that they are actually dependent and interdependent on each other. One cannot exist without the other, and we shall see how this occurs. In Surah 6 verse 96 we are told, "It is Allah who causes the seed grain and the date stone to split and sprout. He causes the living to issue from the non-living, that is the dead, and He causes the non-living or the dead to issue from the living. Then how are you deluded away from the truth?" And this verse so beautifully explains this dependence and interdependence of life and death. Let us see how this interdependence really operates. Now if we look at the plant kingdom, plants need the non-living nutrients. There is the various elements, water from the soil, and also gases like carbon dioxide, oxygen from the atmosphere. Now these are the non-living elements which are essential for life. Now the plants absorb the water and the nutrients from the dead earth. Now the plants then produce food, as we have just explained. And this is a source of food for the animals. So the animals eat the plants and man eat the plants, and so the plant-eating animals are eaten by the meat-eating animals, and ultimately we find, for example, even man eating sheep and plants and so on, and this energy is transferred to him, as we mentioned. Now in this way we find that the various non-living nutrients are now passed from the plant to the plant-eating animals, from them to man, and also from them to the animal-eating animals, the carnivores, and so we find this nutrient is being passed from one to the other. Now when the plants and the animal dies, they are acted upon by the decomposing fungi and bacteria, as we said, and this decomposition of dead matter and the waste products causes these nutrients to be released back into the soil, and now these nutrients are now available again to be used by other organisms, and so we see the cycle continuing. So we can see that we have a continuous cycling of nutrients between living things and non-living environment. Now all organisms are therefore transformed back into the original non-living materials from which they were originally built up. So one can say that living organisms can be considered as temporary constructions made up of materials borrowed temporarily from the earth. The earth therefore contributes to the formation of living organisms, conserves all its material on a long-term basis. It makes possible life to be recreated indefinitely because of this continuous cycling of these nutrients. Therefore, the continuity of life depends on the continuity of death. Because if the organisms did not die, the nutrients would not become available again. And so life would not be possible for the new organisms. And so we see how essential it is for death and to ensure that life actually occurs. And this very beautifully is explained in the Quranic ayah. As we are also told in Surah 3 verse 27, "Thou bringest the living out of the dead, and thou bringest the dead out of the living, and thou givest sustenance to whom thou pleasest without measure." So this very beautifully illustrates how this dead, non-living and living materials are totally intertwined, how death and life are completely intertwined, and how one is dependent on the other. So we see that death is an essential aspect of life, whether it be of animals, whether it be of plants, or whether it be of man himself. He is only using borrowed material from the earth, which must be returned to the earth by his death to be used by the rest of creation. So we see how beautiful the cycling of nutrients maintains efficiency, maintains economy, and conserves all the natural resources. So therefore we find that the elements from which we are created has been in existence since the creation of the earth, which is 5 billion years ago. And when we die, the elements of which we are made will be recycled and used for other living organisms to come in the years in the future. So actually, if we think about it, we are composed of material that has been existent actually since the origin of all creation. And as somebody has once put it as well, that we are created from basically stardust, because it is what stardust, or as we know, the nebulae of gases, which is the origin of the earth itself and the origin of matter as we know it. And so we find that we are actually made up of stardust.
That's quite an interesting paradox, actually, that death is essential for life. I mean, as you've explained, if you look at it, if there was no such thing as death of the various populations, then all the nutrients would have been depleted, the energy would not be restored, and this continuous cycle will not be maintained. So even in death, Allah is actually doing us a favor and is providing for the continuous existence of both plant and animal and mankind's existence. So although it sounds like a paradox, but it is absolutely true that we have to have death in order for mankind to continue existing.